We know how important landside revenues are to airports. April hit on it quite beautifully when the FAA tells us you've got to be self-sufficient, and non-aeronautical revenues are undoubtedly some of the most important revenues for airports. So I'm going to talk a little bit how we do things at SeaTac. Some are very similar to how April does things, but I will say that prior to 2009, we were pretty awful about managing our cost recovery programs and probably not being super wise about how to competitively bid things that we thought were potentially market-based programs, and we've cleaned that up a lot. And under a lot of political fire, it was not pretty. It took a couple of years, but we did get there. So, have hope, April. Okay, so just a quick plug about SeaTac. I think most of you know, I've been telling a lot of people here, we're officially the fastest-growing airport in the nation right now. We have a lot of new service, and we have Delta and Alaska. Alaska's our regional airline, really duking things out and competing with each other right now, which is really a good problem to have for us. We just kind of keep opening the door and letting them come to us with things they want to offer. We have very, very, very strong employment growth. We were predicted to have over 37 million passengers in 2018, and in 2014 we hit 37.4. So our planning folks are kind of going crazy right now, going back to reforecast the next 10 years. In 2014, we were the 15th busiest airport in the nation, but as of right now, we're the 12th. And then a couple of interesting projects coming up at our airport to really help sustain the growth. Our International Arrivals Facility project, which will be on the south end of our airport. I don't know if you've ever flown internationally into Seattle, but our FIS facilities are pretty old and in desperate need of renovation. And then we are going to be renovating our North Satellite, which we're calling our North Star project. All of these things will net us a few additional gates, which is a good thing because we expect by this summer to not have enough gates to operate, and we will be doing hard stand operations by some point this summer. So we also largely have a cost recovery model at SeaTac, although we do a couple of market-based programs as well. The cost recovery, as I'm sure many airports know and other operators are familiar with, is largely O&M and then our fixed costs for capital. And what we do is we allocate those, but when it comes to staffing costs, we allocate them based on the amount of hours my staff spends with that particular operator. So for example, we have operators like, I don't know if Dick Ashey's in the room, he's one of my airporters with Bremerton Kitsap Airporter, but we have operators that kind of come and go into a specific lot. They don't take a lot of my staff time. They have ABI, lets them in and out of the gate. And then we have operators where I have hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of operating agreements, like prearranged limos, for example. And we've got to permit them on a regular basis and bill them. And because there's so many of them, they tend to be people we make more contact with from an enforcement standpoint. So they take a lot more of my staff time. So, Dick and his colleagues out there take up maybe 1% of my staff's time, while prearranged limos take up something like 30%. So we account for those things in the cost model. Before 2009, we didn't really have much of a cost recovery program. It was kind of arbitrary, but what we did do is we just spread everything like peanut butter, and that just wasn't fair. And then all of the other things are based on trips, so that is kind of the spread it like peanut butter. So this is just a quick view of what we do. The different application of fees that we have are probably pretty normal things you've heard about before. We do per trip, permit, and then we have a couple of concession arrangements. Let's start with the concession ones. On the top, you'll see on-demand taxis and on-demand limos. Those are the two programs that over the past few years we've decided should be competitively bid. They're market-based programs. The market should determine what they pay, and so we've gotten pretty competitive with those programs, and it's been very successful for us. So currently, our on-demand agreement is in a 5-year term, and they pay us what they bid in the proposals. And that was a minimum annual guarantee of $3.6 million or 13% of gross revenues, whichever is greater. Something fairly similar for our on-demand limo, and this is a much smaller program, but a good one, and very popular program, by the way. They also pay us a minimum annual guarantee of $732,000 per year. And they also agreed to pay us an additional $4 per trip if they exceeded 38,000 trips in a year, in a contract year. When I first read that proposal, I kind of giggled and thought, oh, that'll never happen. And it did the first year by a lot. So they paid us that additional trip amount. They're in their 4th year of the contract right now, and they've paid us that incremental amount every year since the beginning of the contract. So they've been very successful. Then the rest of the programs you see are all cost recovery programs, and we charge either a permit fee or a per trip fee, sort of based on their business relationship with us and how we interact with them. So you'll see that most of them are per trip fees, with the exception of pre-arranged services such as limos, taxis, or for hire vehicles. The reason we're still doing a permit with these folks is because there's so many of them, and it's just an administrative burden to have to do a monthly invoice to those operators, but we are getting there. Thanks to our newer AVI system and software, thanks Doc. We have the ability to purchase AVI tags at a more reasonable rate, and we're going to get to a point where we do go to per trip fees for everybody in the cost recovery programs. So I wanted to spend a little bit of time talking about how we communicate our fees to our operators. As I mentioned, pre-2009, weren't so good about it. I don't think we ever really communicated with our operators about fees or really anything airport related. So we got smart about it, and we needed to start talking to them about cost recovery anyway. So what we do with them is we meet with them every fall, and we talk to them about things that are going on in the airport and things that have changed over year-to-year changes regarding airport highlights. And then we give them their preliminary fees. We have preliminary fees by that point in the fall. And we do that because it's fair. So these businesses have their own budgets to manage, and fall is generally the time where people are preparing for the next year. So we want to at least give them some information about what we expect their fees to be the following year. So we kind of discuss all that stuff with them, and we can't make it final until our commission approves our final budget, which doesn't happen until December. So as you can imagine, prior to 2009, although we didn't always change our fees every year, the operators didn't take it well when they got a notice on December 18th that their fee was going up, whatever it was going up. So we're much, much better about our communication. We talk with them regularly throughout the year, and we're sure to hold this annual meeting every fall. The next two slides were just examples of things that we share with the operators when we meet with them. So these were from last year. So we show them some budget changes, and we're really transparent about it. So for example, we want to show them where the costs increase. We want to show them the changes in trip forecast, because that's going to affect their fee. And then at the bottom here, we made a mistake in our budget the year before. We forgot to budget for 12 employees. Don't quite know how that was missed, but obviously that's a big error that's going to affect somebody's cost model. So we showed them that. We showed them how we were going to fix it and reconcile it on their behalf. We also show them if we make any changes to categories, and we try to explain why. So for example, in 2014, we were charging different airport or van fees and coach fees based on the size of the vehicle. And some of the finance and budget people that I work with, sort of said, hey, Stacy, this doesn't really make sense. I mean, how do you know that you should be charging a coach more versus a van when they're the same service? It doesn't take my staff any more time to work with a coach charter than it does a van charter. So don't let my MBA fool you. My accounting wasn't, I didn't have really good accounting rationale in previous years. And so we worked through that and came up with 4 new categories, really to represent what the appropriate staff allocation was. So these are just kind of the things we show them and try to be as transparent as possible. Probably the most pertinent and relevant part of the fee schedules that we share with the operators every year, and it's what we call Schedule 2. And what it does is it literally breaks down every classification we have of operator to include their specific staff costs, their O&M costs, and then for the facilities, we have a big table, and it breaks down what operators use what facility, and they get their pro rata share of that use. So what it is it gives the operators absolute visibility to everybody's usage, what they have in terms of trips and what assets they're using, just so they know that they're not being unfairly burdened by paying for an asset that they never use. So for example, we have a off-site taxi holding lot for on-demand taxis, and they are the only one allocated that asset. Nobody else uses it, so nobody else pays for it. So people that I work with, like Sam at Eastside for Hire, certainly would not want to pay for that because he doesn't use it. So we've gotten really clean and fair about that sort of thing in our cost model. And then just one last comment about that actual schedule is regarding our market-based programs, where we're making revenue off of our on-demand taxi and limousine services, we do put that in the cost model, even though those are not cost recovery programs. And we do that so it doesn't unduly burden the other operators. Yeah, so I guess the big table I was talking about was table 3, which you obviously can't read, but you can at least see that all of our ground transportation assets are, organized, and the row going across are all of our different operators. So there's only certain amounts allocated to the operators that actually use those assets. But this one tells the whole story. This is the meat of our cost model. It's an 80-page document that nobody really wants to read. So if our operators just refer to this tends to make a little bit more sense to them. And I think that's all I had for you today. Thank you.